morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Events are happening fast on the ground here, here and in the UK, as we have seen the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly announcing the evacuation of Brits from Sudan. 4,000 British nationals are in Sudan, are currently going to be evacuated as of today. 6 minutes past 9 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Well, that breaking news came out a few hours ago that we are seeing the evacuation of some 4,000 British passport holders, many of those dual nationalities, 400 Brits themselves, actually British nationals in the country, we're told, including some 71 NHS doctors. Large number of people having travelled back to visit family and trapped in the country since war broke out. Fierce fighting broken out that's already led to more than 400 deaths between two warring generals. Well, Brits have been accused of being a little bit late to the game when it came to actually evacuating their personnel and their civilians. Other countries have already evacuated many of their civilians, but of course we are looking at larger numbers for the Brits. But as of this morning, we heard from the Foreign Secretary in a statement on Twitter that British passport holders will be evacuated. Some latest information on that is that 1,400 British military personnel are involved in that evacuation. The plan involves similar aircraft to those used to rescue diplomats from Sudan at the weekend. A400M and C-130 Hercules transport planes. Flights will be taking place from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. Of course, that's a major military base there, flying in to an airport base near Khartoum. Now, of course, that's where we have seen flights leaving to take those 30 diplomats and their families the early hours of Sunday morning. The Foreign Office had previously told citizens to remain in place, to stay in place, to not move, to wait for information. They are still telling citizens not to travel to evacuation sites unless contacted. They've warned, of course, also that plans could change at short notice due to what they call the volatile truce. We have a 72-hour ceasefire agreed by the two warring generals leading that fighting. Families with children or elderly relatives or those with serious medical conditions will be prioritised. Only British passport holders and immediate family members with existing UK entry clearance are being told they are eligible. That is the situation right now. Well, let's talk about all this now with Colonel Ash Alexander Cooper, OBE, who's a former Joint Operational Commander with the British Armed Forces. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, that update we just had in the last few minutes from the Foreign Office, big concerns about how we're going to get people out of the country who need to come out, within that 3-day ceasefire. Tell us your thoughts on the military operation so far.
Well, the planning for this will have been going on for many weeks, if not months, to look at all contingency options by land, sea and air. And therefore, the ceasefire window that now appears to be open, as it were, will be very welcome news, not least to the families worried here in the UK and clearly those who are in hiding in Khartoum. But it is a very narrow window. And the challenge with this particular country is its scale. You know, the fastest way to get people out is clearly by air, but an aircraft is limited in its capacity. So if you can get a few hundred people on each aircraft to get them out, you're going to need very many shuttles over that 72-hour window to ensure that you can get as many, if not all, of those people out. By land is you can have larger convoys and get more people away from Khartoum. But if you were trying to get them to Port Sudan, for example, that's still a 525-mile land journey. And with small children, that would be a nightmare. And
elderly and perhaps sick people as well. I mean, that's the big concern, isn't it? And there are two ships in the Middle East. They've been ready to help evacuate. And we had RAF transport aircraft carrying British troops. They arrived last night in Port Sudan in the southeast of the country, where it's less fighting in that region to sort of carry out reconnaissance missions. Is it the case that we are acting more slowly than other countries? We know that some of the Brits who have already got out, other than the British diplomats, were carried out, by French, by German. So we spoke to the woman of an Irish, or she's Irish, and her father, Irish national. He was able to get out with French and German help, an EU flight. They sort of organised their flights together. Have we been slow in acting, or have our missions been basically under rather more secrecy? And as we had with the diplomats, that actually, yes, the US and the French had announced their diplomats were coming out. We didn't announce it until after they'd left.
Well, it's all a balance of risk at the end of the day. I mean, already within the ceasefire windows that existed last week on Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday, I think a French, Qatari and Egyptian national were wounded in trying to get their people out. So this is always going to be a balance of risk, and the risk calculus for each government and each prime minister or president is going to be different. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that we've been slower than everybody else, because we have been moving and working very closely with the Americans, and they have equally chosen to wait until the ceasefire has been brokered, because that will reduce the risk to life. Because the moment people do leave their houses, the risk remains very, very high.
And it's not just a risk to those civilians who are in the country. It is also, we've spoken to other military representatives today, is a risk to the British forces. And certainly on my Twitter and text feed coming in this morning, a lot of people very concerned about the risk to the British military. Of course, when it came to what happened to the airlift in August 2021 in Kabul, we actually had British forces on the ground already, maintaining control of that airport. Whereas, of course, we don't routinely have British forces on the ground in Sudan. It's a very, very different situation we're facing. Can I put to you a question I put to a very senior figure at the Ministry of Defence earlier this morning before I came on air, and I asked, has the Foreign Office messed up yet again in Sudan, leaving the Ministry of Defence to pick up the pieces yet again, similar to Kabul, where we actually saw, a failure to foresee what was going on, to act quickly, to handle things, failure to process applications, from Afghan interpreters, all of that we've seen many inquiries into by select committees since. A lot of failings happening at the Foreign Office, and Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Office Permanent Secretary both away on holiday at the same time, neither returning to deal with the issue. So I asked, has this left the MOD to pick up the pieces again? And the comment came, this from a very senior figure in the MOD, you might say that, but I couldn't possibly comment. That famous line from Francis Urquhart in the House of Cards. Do you think that actually, frankly, the Foreign Office kind of dropped the ball again?
Well, this is a whole of government effort, obviously, and the military will always be those required to go into a country and do the most risky bit of an extraction. The key thing here, and it's a lesson I hope we have learned, and it's better than Afghanistan, is communication and coordination. The failing then and arguably at some points in the early stages of this evacuation and issue is the clarity of communication and coordination across different government departments, because they each have a role to play. And the military can only enact an evacuation plan when the government, the cabinet and the Foreign Office, give them the wherewithal to do so. So there are signs that it is better than perhaps Afghanistan was, but it's a really critical window now. We cannot be complacent and assume that the 72-hour ceasefire will hold, and must therefore treat every minute and every hour as if it may be our last, and work really hard to get as many people out in this early window before the risk of the ceasefire breaking down happens, because it will be really dangerous if it does break. But it requires the Foreign Office to be very clear and concise in its communication. We know communication is constrained because of internet coverage and cell phones, etc. And if the messaging is poor or too slow, then people will be left behind. That is the very real challenge.
And that is one of the issues, isn't it? That people were saying even 2 days ago, even beginning of yesterday, look, no one's been in touch. And then there was a contact number, for people, and online, you can register your presence in Sudan. Because a lot of the people there, we've got 4,000 British passport holders, largely they're dual nationality, British Sudanese. We've also got 400 British citizens. But there are a lot of people who are there. They will be British people. They're living in Britain. They've gone to visit family members, so for Eid. And again, we had very little travel in recent years. A lot of people visiting their families, and a lot of people say, well, are these people British? Yes, they are. They're British. Many of them born in this country, visiting family members, and now trapped over in this other country. And there is no doubt at all, we have, the British government, the British people, we have a duty of care to all of our citizens. This could happen to any of us. We could be in another country where something awful happens, whether it's the Boxing Day tsunami, whether it's war. These things could happen, and we would expect the British government to come to our aid.
Yeah, well, this is why the Foreign Office issues travel guidance at the end of the day, because this is not a surprise that this is an unstable region and an unstable country. And I don't, knock the fact that people want to go and spend time with family after many years separated because of COVID and travel restrictions. But this has been a volatile region and country for a while. So while that doesn't mean that removes the responsibility of the government to look after its people when the situation does deteriorate, people must also be conscious that they went into a place that has some risk already attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It depends, how risky it was at the time when people travelled travelled there. In terms of the actual practicalities of getting people out of the country, obviously people travelling from their homes, not everyone will be in Khartoum. I would have thought perhaps the majority, it's a vast majority of the population living in the capital city. But people having to travel, we're not going to be seeing, special forces arriving in jeeps or buses, in the dead of night, grabbing people from their homes and taking them to the airport. People are going to have to try and make their way certainly to a central meeting point to get to the airports, aren't they? There is that risk there, and there'll be many people who've been terrified by the fighting. We've seen reports of people who've been sort of saying, look, we've been hiding under the bed. You're hearing explosions, gunshots. We know that one British doctor trapped in Sudan has been shot in the leg. People will be very, very fearful for leaving their homes. And as you say, it's that balance of risk for the individual as well about whether or not they want to take that risk to leave at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you imagine, this is a logistical nightmare. If you had 4,000 people spread across London and you'd never visited London before and you're having to go address to address, trying to find people, hoping that they've given the correct details, this is going to take time. And I worry that the window is too narrow, potentially, unless they can get it increased to actually get all these people out safely and securely. But it will be a very, very much a joint effort. And as you said, people will almost certainly be asked if it is safe to do so, to move to another point where they can be grouped together and then sort of for onward evacuation. But going house to house would be extremely challenging.
I mean, and just to clarify also, the priority will be given, so families with children or elderly relatives or individuals with medical conditions will be prioritised as going on the planes first. That is understandable. Not, we hope, cats and dogs. As I know they weren't prioritised, but they got a plane when other human beings weren't able to get out from Kabul. But with only British passport holders and immediate family members with existing UK entry clearance being told they are eligible, there will be, there'll be others, large families who would like to try and flee, and understandably someone will want to bring perhaps their elderly relatives with them if they are a British passport holder living in this country who've gone back to visit them. That looks like they will not be able to do that, though.
Yeah, and then the risk linked to that is that once a message is sort of spreading in Khartoum that there is an evacuation route, and the Brits, for example, have an aircraft hub where they're going to be taking people out, people who are not British passport holders are likely to move there as well. As we saw that throng in Kabul, one of the biggest challenges for the military, the brave men and women doing their job, was to try and just crowd control with the many people who just turned up on spec, hoping that they might just find a seat. There are 5,000 Nigerians, I believe, 16,000 Americans. I mean, there are many, many people who are seeking a way out, and a challenge will be coordinating a clear message that allows all of our entitled persons to get out, but without spreading or allowing rumours to spread that could completely scupper that plan.
And can I ask, I mean, in terms of training for this sort of thing, and you were a former Joint Operational Commander of the British Armed Forces, amazing the work that the military do, and I think people were in awe of the work of the men and women on the ground in Kabul and what they did. Will there be people who've had that experience at Kabul who will be sent perhaps already been sent to Sudan because they've had that experience of how to handle these sort of crises? Is that sort of experience sort of, basically absolutely vital to be able to carry out these sort of operations efficiently and as safely as possible?
Yeah, I believe very many of the commanders who will be coordinating and involved in this operation have experience from that Kabul evacuation. So lessons will have been learned, certainly on the military side. One would just hope that also across government, the lessons have been learned in terms of communication and a holistic coordination approach to make sure that we are joined up.
You've more hope than I have, I'm afraid. Colonel Alexander Cooper, OB, I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, your time and your expertise as well. 9:19 is the time. Up next.